Hello, and welcome back to the Collector's Corner, the podcast that demystifies art collecting with me, Antonia Piersanti. Today, I'm speaking with Chimere Cissé, who's based in Dubai. Chimere started her career in luxury fashion and media, but growing up in a home filled with antiquities, she early on developed an interest in art. She shares some insights into how this influenced her collecting journey and how, despite following a deep-seated conviction that collecting is what she wanted to do, she often felt like an outsider. A few years ago, Chimere decided to combine her passion for art and her marketing expertise to launch and support various purpose-driven initiatives. The latest example being Stella Alliance, a global community of female collectors aiming to influence fundamental structural change at the root of the gender gap in art collecting. Super interesting. I loved hearing about Chimere's global experiences and perspective and how this shaped her collection into a reflection of her own personal growth story. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining me today, Chimere. Really, really happy and excited to have you.
I'm really happy to be here.
You are my first remote interview, so this is really exciting because you're based in Dubai, right? You live between Dubai and London, is that right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And currently in Dubai, where I'm sure the weather is much nicer than in Europe.
Yes, it's currently 30 degrees today. And
Wow.
I actually looked at the London weather today just by chance and I saw it was 14. So yeah, we're definitely winning. We're definitely winning.
Yeah, awesome.
Mm.
So you're currently running your own communications and brand consultancy. You launched a cultural platform called Art Korero, supporting collaborations between artists, institutions, creative industries. You also in 2024 co-founded Stella Alliance, which is a global community of women collectors. And you're committed to closing the gender gap in art collecting, which I'm really excited to hear more about. You also serve on multiple boards, including a really exciting project called Art Voyage, which is a new type of biennial,
Yes.
which I also have questions about. You're also a lecturer,
Mm.
a speaker, and of course, you're a collector yourself. What I'd like to start with, though, is I saw that you started your career in luxury fashion and media, and only relatively recently pivoted to full-time focus on arts. But I'm curious as to what drove you there, how that came about for you.
Yeah, my career has predominantly in the past been in the luxury space. And I worked in magazines for many years in publishing and then moved brand side. And I have always enjoyed that. It was always so much fun, very dynamic. The emergence of social media and the shift to, what is now, very commonplace, but at the time is really exciting, this digital convergence in publishing and luxury. And I have always collected art or been around the art world, but never in a formal capacity. I never worked in the arts. It was purely my passion. And I think because of this and my knowledge of the art world, I sort of more recent years have been asked by different organizations to support them in raising capital for projects or funding. And it was through this that I started to see an opportunity for a consultancy that really bridged the gap between commercial world and the art world better. And it was during COVID when everything suddenly ground to a halt that I was able to really sort of explore this more. And an opportunity presented itself to create Art Korero, which is essentially an agency that brings to life different artistic visions, but with an underpinning of support by different commercial organizations. And so that is how I transitioned. And it started as a very organic, very small project, an idea, and it just grew and grew. And the team expanded, and, the different projects that we're working on grew in size. And it's been a really exciting journey.
When you say bridging the gap between the commercial world and the art world. What does that look like? How does Art Korero do that?
We have in the UAE many hospitality venues, for instance, and a lot of those spaces are not doing art programming as part of their marketing integration. And I think, in previous years, it wasn't something that they had even considered. You could put, a print in a lobby in a frame and it's kind of sufficient, right? But I think in more recent years, a lot of these hospitality venues, for instance, have started to understand that there's real power and potential in creating a very dynamic arts program that they own and is part of their their marketing approach to their clients. And I think that they started to understand the power that that can have in bringing together existing or new communities around their brand, and also providing platforms that they didn't previously have. So we do a lot of work in that space, bringing together workshops and panels, art residency programs, and it's been really interesting to see a lot of hospitality brands who previously said, "No, no, we have no budget for art and art integration," suddenly now come to us saying, "Here's our budget. What can you do?" Which is really exciting, and it's a great way for them to show support of particularly local artists and to really find new ways to interact with the communities that are based here. And particularly during the summer period, which is quite long here in Dubai, the visitor numbers drop. But obviously, you still have a very live, active local audience that is looking for interesting things to be doing with their time during those summer months.
It stood out for me when I was reading about the projects that you support and the organizations you work with. Just generally the initiatives that you lead with Art Korero, they seem to be very purpose driven. And I was wondering why that's important to you and what purpose means to you in the arts specifically.
Oh, yeah, hugely. I think shifting away from luxury, I kind of came out and I started working with some organizations that specialized in sustainability and sustainable approaches within the luxury space. And it was such an eye opening experience. And I worked with this wonderful UN officer named Simone Cipriani, he's now lecturing at university in Milan. And he was hugely inspiring to me. And I really, for the first time, started to really comprehend the impact that, your work can have and what is it that I really want to be saying and, utilizing my time for. And just thinking a little bit about that legacy piece and what we're leaving behind. And I think that it was during that period that I really decided that the work that I would be doing moving forward needed to have a very intentional approach, very purposeful, as much as, one can, working in a commercial way. But, there is so much opportunity to be doing the work that we were doing, but ensuring that it had great this great impact on society rather than it being a detriment or being sort of superfluous. And so I think in terms of the work that I'm doing in the arts space, I'm really interested, particularly at the moment, in this intersection of wellness and art. And we've just done this wonderful project with Therme Art and an artist named Annabelle Schneider, who is Swiss born but New York based, who creates these wonderful environments. She's a trained architect and artist, and she creates space for pause and reflection and contemplation and, a sort of a hyper active world that we live in. And I just love this approach and the impact that her work particularly has on visitors. And we just created this wonderful project called Interlude, In Between Is Now. And that was for Dubai Design Week. And it's essentially like a giant cocoon that you can climb into, so you can just stop and rest, and just having this kind of uniformed exterior whiteness just immediately kind of relaxes your senses, we were able to create a program that went alongside this. And we had some wonderful practitioners like Anastasia Achilleos and Jay Camel from Human Garage, which is all about resetting your fascia nervous system. And that was really fantastic to be able to create these really intentional sessions that were open to the public, that were free, and that had such a wonderful effect on people who left really sort of enchanted and reset.
Amazing. I just wanted to take a couple of steps back and talk about your personal collecting journey a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, I read that you grew up in a home surrounded by antiques, which sounds really awesome. I would love for you to take me back to what that was like, where you grew up, how you grew up, what it meant, what art meant in your household, in your
Yeah.
family.
Well, my aunt was a painter, so I literally grew up, surrounded by her art pieces and her practice. And as much as my mother tried to encourage my aunt to teach me to paint, I never had the patience. So it was clear early on that I was never going to be an artist. But obviously my love of the arts has now kind of come full circle, and I've been able to apply my experience in the marketing world to my love of the arts. But yeah, so it was always sort of very central to my upbringing. And, my mother was also very passionate about art and antiquities, and, would take me and my younger brother to museums on the weekend, or doing different, painting classes and workshops. So I was really fortunate in that sense that it was part of my early language. And I guess, my mother had a very, specific love of art from a certain era. And, there was certainly a lot of unusual pieces in our home, even some sort of taxidermy kind of,
Oh, wow.
which, I was always told as as a young child that they all died naturally, which I don't know if that was actually true. But anyway, but yeah, so I always had a lot of, Renaissance art and growing up. And I think it was interesting because later on I was really interested in contemporary art, and I was introduced to contemporary art through some people who were part of my, young formative years. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to grow up around antiquities, because it was a good base knowledge, I think, for the arts.
Do you feel like that helped you train your eye a little bit, or maybe recognize techniques, ways of approaching works as well, ways of looking at artworks?
I think just sort of having, art books around and these sorts of things. I think my mother used to make me read these books. That was, you want to read a book? Okay, here, read this. I wasn't offered children's books necessarily. Obviously, looking back, I
It
think
probably
it was
didn't
great.
feel great at the time, but now you're
Yeah,
grateful that was
it's
the case.
funny. You question things that you don't know, right? I remember there was one book, Barbara Carton's Book of Lovers, something like this. So these beautiful kind of romantic paintings, and I'd go through and I'd have my favorites. And at the time, you think this is normal, but looking back, no, it wasn't. It wasn't so normal. And things that were probably quite frustrating to me as a child. I remember my aunt, she had such beautiful writing. A lot of artists, they write so beautifully, right? And my
Yeah.
writing had been kind of terrible. And so another job that my poor aunt was tasked with was trying to improve my writing. And so I had all these calligraphy pens. It was a disaster. It really was a disaster. But I remember having sessions with her, calligraphy writing session, and it never caught on. So I'm still a terrible writer. So don't ask me to cards or name cards.
So how did you get into collecting then? How did that collecting journey begin for you personally?
I think early on in university, I had a relationship with a curator, contemporary art curator, who really introduced me to the world of contemporary art. Because before that, I'd obviously just been surrounded by, my mother's art and her collection, and I hadn't really been, yeah, immersed into the contemporary art world until then. And then he introduced me to a lot of artists, and I was really lucky to have the chance to meet a lot of them as well that he was working with. So naturally, I kind of developed a fondness for a lot of Australian contemporary artists. It was through those relationships that I was able to start collecting some of their pieces, and then also collecting at auction as well. I found that quite fun and exhilarating. Going to London and going to the auctions and bidding on things and artists that I loved, but probably couldn't afford, at the peak of their market, for instance, but, found a way, as a young student to be able to buy them at auction, And it was a bit daunting because there weren't many people who looked like me, and being, a young woman, I was sometimes the only one in the room, but none of my peers were really collecting at that time. And so it did feel a little odd. You felt like a little bit of an outsider, but something inside me just said, yeah, just keep going. And so that's what I did. And I started to build my collection. And then, step by step, you start to build relationships with gallerists, and then it goes from there. So what was exclusively, an Australian contemporary art collection now has expanded. I started collecting some YBAs, and I got interested in African art, my heritage. I'm half African. And then it just continued on. And suddenly, you look at a collection that's now like a patchwork of artists from, all over the world, but it's also kind of my journey and where I've lived geographically started to play into that, I think, and an evolution as well over time. Yeah, it's been a fun journey.
How has your approach to collecting evolved? Is it different today to what it was when you started?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you get older, you have more knowledge and understanding of how the art, market works. And, I was quite naive to it when I first started. And yeah, I mean, I'm always still learning and discovering artists that I'd really love to have in my collection. It's an ongoing process. And I think if you haven't come from a multi-generational collecting family, I mean, a lot of the art world is quite confusing or challenging, and the language itself is really quite nuanced. I think it's not always clear, and you can make some missteps if you don't have a good sort of support system around you to guide you. And I've never worked with an advisor before, but obviously I've had lots of great, guides, whether that's be a gallerist or, meeting artists themselves. And, artists always support other artists too, which is really nice, understand what you like, and they can introduce you to other artists.
Do you have a vision for your collection?
Yeah, I've always, and particularly with the Australian artists I collect, it was always with the view that I would be able to publicly open that work in some way, whether that's, donating it to an Australian museum or, setting it up as a foundation at some point. So it was always sort of, yeah, collected with that view, that goal in mind. And then my own personal pieces. Yeah, I don't think I could ever sell anything from the collection. I think that'd be very
You've
difficult.
never sold anything? You still have
No,
everything?
never,
Oh, cool.
never. I'm a hoarder by nature, so yeah, I think I would regret it too much, and no, I couldn't do it.
I think that's always really nice when private collectors consider opening up their collection to the public, whether it's, in the future or in the form of, like you said, a foundation or a space where the public can see it, or, occasionally doing maybe tours of their homes and their collection. I think that's awesome. Like it just opens up a whole new world of works you can see and appreciate that are otherwise just not visible to the public. So I think that's really cool that you're thinking about that. When you buy or when you consider buying an artwork, what do you look for?
I don't often buy spontaneously, so it's usually an artist that I've had my eye on for some time, and I like to do a bit of research. So even if I find an artist at a fair, I always like to sort of go away and look into that artist more deeply, and then start to build a relationship with their gallery. But it's all from the gut. It's my gut reaction to things. I just see something, and I just immediately know if I'm interested in that work. I don't know what it is or how it comes about, but it's pretty immediate.
And do you meet the artists, or do you like to meet the artists before you buy?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, it can sometimes change your feeling towards a work once you meet someone.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to have a perceived idea of their work and who they are, and you know keep a bit of mystery. But it is nice to say that you know an artist as well that's in your collection, and I'm lucky to know a lot of the artists that I own, and yeah, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. It can go either way.
It can go either way. It's funny because when I started asking this question, in my mind, it was a no-brainer. Yes, of course, you'd wanna meet the artist because it's just great to understand where they're coming from and their context, but the more, I think about it, and I'm wondering, well, maybe sometimes you just want the artwork to speak to you for itself, like, on its own, and then, of course, if you start maybe, there's you start collecting that artist more in depth and then you'd like to meet them. But I can see how, yeah, it would, of course, influence your perception of the artwork, so that's an interesting one.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's Seal. Is it the singer Seal? He doesn't put his lyrics in his albums because he likes people to assume what they're singing is correct.
I didn't know that.
With his albums. Sometimes, sometimes it's good to just leave people with their own imagination sometimes.
In your own collection and your collecting approach, do you feel a responsibility or, desire to support underrepresented artists or younger galleries? Is that something you think about when you collect?
It's not part of you know, my plan, but it is nice for sure, when you're able to do that. Smaller galleries are so appreciative of support, especially at the moment in a market, downturn. But it isn't something I, specifically focus on when I'm looking at expanding the collection. No.
When you think back about when you started as a collector, is there something you wish you had known? I mean, you had, you were surrounded already by quite a few people from the art world. You mentioned this curator who introduced you to a lot of artists. So it feels like maybe early on you had the codes to detect and understand how the art world works a little bit. But are there anything that became obvious only a few years later that would have changed how you approach things early on?
Yeah, I think I wish I had known I was on the right path, and not to be daunted by the art world or thinking that I didn't belong there. I wasn't collecting in a couple, I didn't have some rich husband supporting my collecting, desires. I wish that I had had more confidence in sort of, standing alone and continuing with building my collection. Just go for it, be bold and maybe not rush to make decisions as well. There can be a lot of pressure to make a decision on an artist quickly and to buy, and allowing yourself to take a bit of time and, just to really explore that artist. And, there will always be more artworks to buy. So, yeah, taking time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There is this rush in the moment when you see something that you like and that speaks to you. You just kind of want to buy it right away, and it's sometimes hard to pause. But you're right, there will always be art to buy, and it's kind of nice to see if a few months later you still think about that specific art or artists. I really want to talk about Stella Alliance more. So you're on a mission to close the gender gap between women and men art collectors and patrons. I think it's super super interesting and super inspiring when I came across what you do. I loved it. So you founded Stella with your co-founder, Greta, out of frustration with the lack of support that is available to women collectors. And I was wondering if there's a specific moment or maybe a series of events that crystallized that for you specifically.
It definitely was a series of things. I met Greta, I think in 2021, and we'd just been talking about this gap that we were seeing and anecdotally. And we'd had a number of conversations about this and also just sort of asking ourselves why this is. And we started to look into it more formally, and we're really shocked at the numbers, um, and how low the participation numbers were by women who collect. And obviously, there are some fantastic women collectors out there. And, we're very aware of those people. But in terms of the general market, we were looking at numbers as low as 25%. And this was really strange when you correlated that with women's access to capital increasing. And we started doing some specific research into this, and then this was sort of the birth of Stella. We really wanted to try to have some impact and to try to shift this to see if we could, by bringing together some really impressive women collectors, to act as sort of a shining light on, women, spotlight women-owned collections and how fantastic they can look and be, and looking at the different nuances between the way that men and women collect generally, which is quite different. Some of the things that we find that women tend to collect in a more altruistic way. So they're really focused on supporting artists, being involved in the community, lending their time to different art institutions, whether it be on a board or on a committee, and then even opening up their collections. It's something that's very specific to women collectors. And we also know that women tend to acquire more ethnic minorities, more queer artists, diversity in terms of the mediums they collect. Women tend to collect more textiles. So we really started to understand the negative impact that if women were only participating, as 25% of the art market, certain artists that will go on to commercial success, it's really been because of a male selection. And this is when we started to realize how important it was that we have a more equal perspective in terms of male to women collectors, and how important it is when you look through the sort of canon of art history, if women's views are not being heard or they're not part of that conversation, certain artists could be completely overlooked and may not have any visibility or success that may have otherwise. So we started to really see how important this is, and Stella came about to really try to find ways to bring more women into the collecting world, and to share our love of collecting by giving either access points, educational opportunities, and then doing research as well into women collectors. We have a report that's being undertaken now, specifically looking at the global position of women collectors, which we're really excited to launch next year.
Who's a typical member of Stellar? Is it very obviously active collectors, seasoned collectors? Is there also an intention to help aspiring collectors get started? And if so, how do you bridge that range of experience between somebody who's just getting started and somebody who's been collecting for, I don't know, 25 years?
So we have a patron circle, and this was done very intentionally because we wanted people to support our mission. This wasn't about creating a ladies who lunch club or sightseeing. This was really about empowering collectors. And so we started the patron circle to provide the support and the underpinning to be able to do our cultural gatherings internationally, our research, our educational programs. And our patrons really range from experience. Some, just entering the collecting journey, and others are very established. We also have a founding patrons group, and they're able to offer their experience and their knowledge in such a beautiful and meaningful way that it really does inspire a whole new generation of women collectors.
So they also act a little bit like mentors then to maybe the younger collectors or those that are getting started.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, one of the objectives of Stella is to really shine a spotlight on women owned collections. And obviously, there are some fantastic collections by couples, and that's great. But we're really focused on women owned collections. And we really want to give them more visibility. And by doing that, we hope to really inspire other women to start collecting in their own name. And it's really important to be able to have that visual representation to show women that you don't have to wait till you're in a couple, or you could start now.
You are coming from a place of wanting to influence structural change behind why today there is this gender gap between collectors. Are there any specific structural aspects that you had in mind when you were referring to that?
One thing we come across sometimes is couples who have collected substantial collections who then go on to divorce. Oftentimes, the artwork is not in the woman's name, even though she has been the primary decider of that work, and perhaps the husband's been bringing in the capital. And likewise, you see a lot of times, it's her that's been, on the board of the museum doing all the work fundraising, and he's brought in the capital, but she's kind of now left without access to potential works. And, this is something that needs to be considered. And we we like women to consider things like, legalities around building a collection, as
Uh-huh.
well as, the curatorial decision making, as well as, legacy building, all of these kind of aspects we discuss. And that's what we really mean when we're talking about that educational piece. It's not just about sitting and listening to a panel. For instance, we recently hosted a collector's workshop in Milan, and we had an art lawyer present. We had a really incredible collector, Valeria Napoleoni, who has, an incredible collection of women artists. We had Patos Uztek, who's a curator, free sculpture. And we have these diverse perspectives on the industry, but also people who are able to lend advice around certain topics that as a collector you really need to consider. If you're building a collection that you're hoping you'll be able to pass on to your children, have you considered what planning might need to go into that? Or some of the technical legal requirements in terms of being able to hand that down and the best vehicle to do that. So we tried to really empower the women who are part of Stella to be able to make the best decisions for themselves and their collections with a really good, broad knowledge of information.
I think that it's really cool that you do that because these are the maybe more quote unquote boring aspects, but they're really important. And it's super
Yes.
difficult to find that sort of information.
And even things like taking equity out of your artwork.
Yeah.
You'll have
Yeah.
money hanging on the walls, sometimes quite a lot of money hanging on your wall. Maybe you want to take loan to value and buy more art with that. So, we like to be able to present these ideas and options to the women who are part of Stella to be able to make really informed decisions and to also maximize some of the benefits that sometimes are not so clearly visible
Yeah.
without, specific guidance and knowledge in the art industry.
Providing all this mentorship and advice and connections, but you also help women actively build their collections. I'd love to hear a bit more about that, the art drop model, and I'm also curious to hear how is it different from working with a traditional art advisor?
We certainly have a lens with which we view artworks, and Greta, my collaborator on Stella, calls it the Stella Six, and it's 6 points that she's very adamant that an artwork must have to make it into a stellar art drop. Looking at the trajectory of an artist and the cultural resonance, the distinctive character, like, so looking at those unique or defining mediums or concept or context, the critical momentum, which is very
Yeah.
different to sort of the trend. We're not interested in that, but obviously looking at works that have been recognized by institutions, future impact, looking at that long-term cultural value, and then integrity and provenance, obviously very important, that trust and long-term stewardship. So they are the Stella Six.
Very cool. How do you become a member of Stella then?
So it is a by invitation model, and it's not to be exclusionary to people. It's just that we really wanted the group to, as I mentioned, to be active collectors or to be very intentionally building collections. Anyone can apply. We just ask for a little bit of background information, and then we make decisions biannually. So twice a year we do an intake.
What are the next key milestones for Stella? Because you've had a lot of success over
Mm,
the past year and a lot of momentum. So curious
yes.
to hear what's next.
Yeah, well, we're going to Abu Dhabi next. Obviously, exciting with the news that Abu Dhabi Art will become Freeze Abu Dhabi next
Mhm.
year. So we're actually hosting a panel discussion, and we're doing that in collaboration with Lobe, who we
Okay.
have collaborated with before, and that we love what they're doing and their support of the arts, specifically the craft sector. But our panel will be on patronage, and we have some really fantastic speakers from NYU University Abu Dhabi and the Guggenheim. We also have a really wonderful collector, Zena Keir, who's going to be talking too. And we're going to also have a very special artist who's going to be joining us from Italy. So that's our next big activity. But next year we're doing a whole host of things, from workshops to gatherings in different cities, from Switzerland to Qatar. So lots happening, and obviously the unveiling of our report, which we're really excited about.
That will be released next year in the beginning of the year?
Yes, in February during Art Basel
February.
Qatar.
I would like to talk about another one of your really cool projects, which is Art Voyage. My understanding is it's a nomadic
Yeah,
biennial, and
that's
that's super
correct.
interesting. It's a completely new model. I would love to hear a bit more. What drew you to participating in this initiative? I think you're on the board, right? On the advisory board?
Yes, I am. Yes, I was invited by the founder, Tima Jam, and who I've known for some time. And I think it's really relevant to this particular time that we're in. And the biennial, it will be a nomadic biennial in different parts of the world, but it explores migration, memory, and I think it just really deeply resonated with me. Having lived in different places, I really loved their approach to sort of human centered conversations and creating dialogues in this area with diasporic voices, very culturally diverse perspectives, and creating some of these new stories or new ways of seeing the world. So I was very excited to be a part of this, and they kicked off just before Freeze with this wonderful summit, which brought together a lot of really incredible thinkers and speakers. And I'm really excited to see this journey unfolding with them and the work that they're doing. They just released this beautiful artwork, sculptural artwork in the UK, and there'll be more art pieces popping up as time goes on, and working with different artists. Yeah, it's a very exciting initiative. Very exciting.
One of their missions to amplify underrepresented creative voices. So I was
Yes.
wondering, from your perspective, what are what are the most persistent barriers that are preventing currently these communities, of artists, curators, also collectors, from actually fully participating in the art conversation?
As we know, studio space is expensive, art school is expensive, if you're lucky enough to even be able to support yourself to go to art school. And when you come from an economically, socially challenged part of the world, I think even more so, I mean, your chances of success as an artist is so minimalized simply from where you're born. So I think these sorts of platforms, which are really looking to championing those, underrepresented communities, is so important. So I'm very, happy to support Tima's mission, and to lend support with this really great initiative.
I have one more question before a little bit more of a quick fire. Back to collecting.
Hmm.
You mentioned earlier where, in a or a difficult moment for the art market, it's a little bit of a turning point with a new generation of collectors coming up. What are the challenges that you see for new collectors or emerging collectors in today's art market, and how can they navigate those challenges?
There's so much choice out there. I think you need to have a perspective or a goal, because otherwise you could just go in a million different directions. And also being able to find your support network or to find your community. You can't be aware of everything and everything going on and every artist in every gallery. I mean, it's impossible. So I think if you can find a community that is interested in the same things that you're interested in collecting, and don't forget, collecting extends beyond fine art. Collecting can
Yeah.
be anything from porcelain to, books. If you can find your community, then it will help sort of decipher the information for you, and
Yeah.
also to ensure that you're attending the right events or openings or biennales or whatever it is that you want to be experiencing, to help sharpen your knowledge, information, and so forth. So yeah, that would probably be my advice.
Awesome. I would love to know, what is the last artwork that you purchased?
Oh. I just had one delivered this week. Been waiting for it to come for a little while. It was a work by the Chapman brothers, and I bought it in an auction. And yeah, I've been very excited for it to come. It's an older work of theirs, liked
Is
for
it a
some
painting?
time. It's not actually. It's what it is. It's a painting over an etching, actually.
Oh, okay.
Um,
You have to send me a picture.
yeah, I will. I will.
How would you describe your collection in one word?
Oh my gosh, bonkers is the first word that came to mind. I don't think it's everyone would love it. I mean, some of it's a little dark and a bit subversive, hence why I love Chapman Brothers' work. Yeah, so there's that. And a lot of it is figurative, which is something, it just keeps coming back to people. And yeah, I don't really have much pretty abstract, that's for sure. I
Mm.
don't have much pretty abstract. I do did notice recently that I have a lot of pieces on wood. So wooden works make up quite a bit of the collection, which is an
Interesting.
interesting subcategory that emerged. That it really is a tapestry, and it is a journey. Like, it keeps changing, and my perspective changes, I think, as I get older. It's a bit bonkers. Yeah.
Who's the one artist that you're really excited about and you've been following maybe for a little while, but you haven't bought anything of theirs yet?
There is an artist that I'm very excited about, but I can't tell you who it is because he's not gallery represented yet. And
Oh,
I have to keep it a secret for now until I get some of his work, and then I'll tell everybody. I'll tell everyone. But he is fantastic. I'm very excited about his painting. He's based in Poland, And I just have this feeling about him. Every time I look at his work, I just get so excited.
So
But I'm
you
always
can't share his
discovering
name
new
yet.
artists. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'll tell you in a later episode. Who else? Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of blue chip artists who, you know, I aspire to own one day. There's certainly something to aspire to. And,
Yeah.
obviously budget does play a part. There's so many fantastic blue chip artists who've gone on to enormous success whose prices are now in the $1 to $3 million range, which is outside of my budget. But I'd love
Right.
to own them, sure.
Finally, I
Yeah.
was wondering if there is a collector you particularly admire or look up to.
I think I mentioned earlier Valeria Napoleoni. I think just I love her commitment and her vision because she only collects women artists, and she's just stuck by this for like the last 20 years. She's just focused on women artists. And when she started, it wasn't a trendy thing at all. It was something quite unusual to just collect women artists, but she really stuck to that and was quite pioneering. And now, obviously, there's a lot of fantastic women only artist collections, but, she was really quite ahead of her time in that regard. And I
Yeah.
also love how bold her collection. It's so bold, and her taste is so avant-garde and unapologetic, and I think that's so inspiring. I dare you to go and see her collection and not come out and just be like, "Right, let's go for it," let's be more daring in our selection and don't be so limiting. Sometimes I think, "Oh gosh, should I really be buying that? I don't know if my mother-in-law is gonna approve of that piece." It's really out there, and when you see someone like Valeria and her collection, it's a great reminder to really be fearless in the approach and true to works that inspire you.
No, I agree. I've been speaking to her and trying to interview her as well on the podcast, and hopefully that will work out soon because I agree. Her story is super inspiring. She was really pioneered this approach of focusing on female artists only, and just from the pictures I've seen of her collection, it looks incredible. Chimere, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Glad it worked out, even though it was remote.
Yes, thank you so much, and for, having me on and also creating this platform.
That's it for today's episode of The Collector's Corner. If you enjoyed it, do follow the show and leave a short rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps more people find these conversations. And if you've got thoughts, feedback, or someone you think I should talk to next, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop me a message on Instagram or through the website, thecollectorscornerpodcast.com. Thank you for listening and for being part of this growing community. Until next time.